There's a lot of zombie games nowadays, and that's actually a good thing. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 zombie games you have to play in 2020. And as a very quick disclaimer before we get started, we know Dying Light 2 is not coming this year, so we're not going to talk about it. Rest assured, if we thought it had a chance, we definitely would talk about it. We're excited about it, but probably not this year. Starting off at number 10, The Last Stand Aftermath, a roguelite action-adventure game. It's actually quite interesting. You get infected in this game. Do you necessarily become a zombie? No, you're actually setting out to try to explore and make a difference in some way. Honestly, I like the way it's set up because you are infected. You can actually use some mutations. And when you die as a survivor, you just pick up again as another survivor, unlocking different things. I think that it looks like a pretty awesome game. I also like that it's isometric and yet has pretty good looking graphics. It's going to launch in early access sometime in the second half of this year. I'm really looking forward to it. At number 9 is The Walking Dead Onslaught, which is a VR linear level-based game where you're essentially going to be shooting up a bunch of zombies. Now, it looks like it's got a pretty good arcadey feel to it, and in that respect, it's different than the other Walking Dead game we're going to mention later in the video, which seems to be a little bit more physics-based and a little bit more immersion-based. It's a little more realistic. It's based on the show, whereas the other game we're going to mention is based on the comic books. I don't know. It looks fun to me. It doesn't necessarily look like super immersive, but I'm not necessarily thinking that's what it's for. There's also a kind of infinite mode, apparently, that if the gameplay itself is super fun, might in theory be enjoyable. At number 8 is Rainbow Six Siege Quarantine, which aptly named for the time, although it's not quite the same thing. Quarantine is basically a continuation of the limited time event Outbreak, which was very popular and had people squaring off against an alien parasite, and information we've gotten on the game since they announced it back in 2019 has indicated is basically that same thing, except for the alien parasite spread to nationwide. Now, Ubisoft originally planned on releasing this early in 2020. We haven't heard a lot about it at all this year. However, we do basically know what it's going to be like from Outbreak, and I think that them taking their time with it isn't necessarily the worst thing, because Outbreak is great. It's short though, and what we want is a full-length game like that. And it seems like that's what we're gonna get, so I look forward to finding out the release date and then ultimately playing it. At number 7, it's Zombie Army 4 Dead War. This is a fun game. It's an offshoot of Sniper Elite, but there's a lot more to it than just sniping, and it's actually kind of fast-paced for understanding where its roots come from. This game is absolutely at its best as a co-op game. This is a game that just lets you do so much. Considering it has its roots in Sniper Elite, there is obviously sniping. You do get your slow motion kill cams from that, but there's also what seems kind of like a Red Dead Redemption inspired quick fire lineup chain of headshots. And it's a really well put together game. It's third person. The graphics are actually really, I mean, they're not like hyper real or anything, but they've got a great style to them that, although I wouldn't call overly stylized, has very distinct look to it, in my opinion. I enjoy it. It's a great game, particularly with 3 friends. At number 6 is State of Decay 2 Juggernaut Edition, which of course gives you the seminal game State of Decay 2 in a manner that has been quote-unquote reimagined. State of Decay is a sandbox zombie game. You do have to do survival, but you're also capable of doing a lot of interesting things that are more player-generated. They added plenty to the Juggernaut edition, including remastered graphics, some upgrades to the engine, a couple of new modes like siege modes, and even another full open world map to play around in. This is a game where every choice matters because deaths are permanent, but if you go ahead and build yourself a base/community that is good, people want to join it, and that makes the game cooler by far. I mean, these things do come with a fair amount of bugs. It's a kind of buggy game, but they slowly and surely fix that stuff, most of it anyways. And if you ask me, the gameplay is certainly worth the bugs. At number 5 is ZomDay, a fast-paced zombie shooter that drops you into VR. Now, ZomDay doesn't have what I would call a good name. That being said, it is absolutely a wild ride. Not only does it have great gunplay, but the melee is phenomenal. They really went ahead and made sure that it was what you were expecting. And a lot of the slow motion stuff in the game is very cool. What's great, you get to customize your character and what skills they use. You have different perks that you can choose from. And while I probably wouldn't consider this like the end-all be-all of a zombie shooter on VR, I think it's probably a good indicator of how that genre is going to play out on VR. It's certainly the best example I've seen. It kind of builds on concepts we've seen in Left 4 Dead 2, but does it in VR. Like I said, I think that if this becomes a franchise and continues to develop, it's probably the franchise to watch. Like, this is the way I would put it. If you like arcade shooters, you like zombie shooters, and you like VR, it's as good as you're gonna get. And that's not like faint praise or anything. It's actually very good. I just think that it probably will develop further as a genre. There's a lot that's possible, and there's a very solid, awesome foundation in this game. At number 4 is Undying. Undying is a very different looking game. It's a highly stylized adventure game in which you play as a mother that has been bitten by a zombie, and the idea is, of course, to not die, while doing everything you can to protect your son. It's a recipe for heartbreak, let me go ahead and say. But it takes such a radically different approach to graphics. I've never seen a zombie game that looks like this. You basically have to teach your son how to do things like cook, engage in combat, etc. And the point is teaching him. He learns them from watching you. And I think that that's a really interesting dynamic to put down into a game like this. It just kind of reminds me of like a zombie game that is Untitled Goose Game in some ways. And that's great because I loved Untitled Goose Game. Although I do think the core mechanics are probably different than bothering people. It just has that vibe to it, and I'm quite excited to see how far that goes. At number 3 is Dead Matter, which is a roguelite first-person shooter, which intends to present a sandbox survival horror. It's set in Alberta, Canada, up in the Rocky Mountains. It's a pretty cool setting, actually, because it has the familiarity of North America, which most people will have, but it's also subject to much more northern weather. What I think is cool about the game is a lot of it is actually underground. It just has a very different feel to it from a lot of these types of games. Like, you don't see a lot of games where you're walking through underground tunnels that are just caked in light with a really cool haze. I just think it's a unique image, personally. It's also a crowd-funded game, which is cool. It definitely doesn't look like a crowd-funded game. And one cool thing, I think, is that what you use on the in-game comms is actually run through the environmental sound, and I just think that's really neat. At number 2 is Resident Evil 3 Nemesis Remake. I mean, how are we gonna go without mentioning this? The recent Capcom remakes have really just been phenomenal. It's just been exciting to go through these games again in a completely different way. Perhaps the only criticism I would give it is that it's not long enough, but again, we're working with source material that kind of necessitates certain lengths in order to work in today's setting. So it's not a major criticism, I would say. Overall, it's as fun as Resident Evil 2's remake. Is it necessarily quite as good story-wise? But I would always say that Resident Evil 1 through 3 are my favorites, and it's not without reason. However, the mechanics in the remakes has just been infinitely better than the mechanics in the originals. And if you enjoyed the 2 remake, why wouldn't you enjoy the 3 one? That's been out since April, so yeah, play it. And finally at number 1, Walking Dead Saints and Sinners, a VR game that relies heavily on melee combat and physics to make what is honestly one of the coolest zombie combat scenarios out there. There is shooting in the game. It's not the best thing in the world, but I think it's definitely not bad enough for you to say, oh, I don't want to play this phenomenal game. Also, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the absolute best graphics you're ever going to see in a game, but I don't know that that is the most important aspect of it. It's just a game that does melee combat with zombies better than anything else. It's so fun. Zombies react in such silly, fun ways, and you can even get a laugh out of it, although the atmosphere will definitely freak you out if you get too immersed, and you can easily get too immersed. There's a story mode, there's the trial. I mean, it's pretty standard stuff, but it's just so well executed. It's a must play if you like VR. Which of these zombie games have you played? Leave us a comment, let us know. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe, don't forget to enable all notifications, and we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon, you can follow me on Twitter at FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.